what are your comments on muscle preservation in elderly? How can we improve upon that?
Muscle is king. First of all, let me just start by saying that at any age, at any stage in life, you should be able to build your muscle. So there was a common myth that we cannot build muscle after a certain age. Or if you're a female, you have less muscle, you cannot work on it. If the muscle loss is more than 10%, then that is alarming. But yes, muscle preservation is key. Muscle strength is a great marker.
What are your views on the anti-obesity drugs, including the GLP-1 RS? And we can categorize SGLT2 as maybe in the similar category too.
You know, so many of famous people are taking these anti-obesity medications and losing weight. And then of course, there's always going to be a second headline which talks about medications causing muscle loss. And a combined program of lifestyle along with the anti-obesity medications will certainly help to prevent the sarcopenia.
Hi all, welcome to the new episode of The Genuine Podcast. I'm Dr. Ashwin Mugundan, consultant in Dr. Mohan's Diabetes Specialty Center, and interviewing Dr. Rucha Mehta. She's a consultant endocrinologist in Edmo Clinic and Apollo Hospitals, Ahmedabad, who's interested in obesity and metabolism. So she's our guest today, and ma'am will be giving us answers regarding the questions on muscle preservation. See, she's our apt guest today because she is interested in these topics. She has been treating patients for years and an expert in this field of obesity and metabolism. So let's start straight away, ma'am.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, welcome, ma'am. Ma'am, actually my question that is first coming into my mind, usually when we talk about muscle, we think about the gym goers, those who bulk up their muscles and all. But it's not only about the muscle bulking up or building up the muscles. It has far-reaching consequences than what we think in the periphery. So let's talk about dig in the actual problem that is coming into our clinical practice regarding muscle preservation, which we know that the elderly population, those who are prone for falls, and then it's kind of end of their life. Once they have a major fall, it's very highly unlikely that they are going to make a comeback. So what are your comments on muscle preservation in elderly? How can we improve upon that?
So I think, Arvind, that's fantastic. I'm glad you're asking me that question because muscle is king. First of all, let me just start by saying that at any age, at any stage in life, you should be able to build your muscle. So there was a common myth that we cannot build muscle after a certain age. Or if you're a female, you have less muscle, you cannot work on it. So what we try to train our patients, number one, is first of all, you need to assess whether you have muscle or not. So there are two ways of going about this. Number one is, of course, you want to know muscle mass. So how much muscle do you have? Simply put, you could do simple measures such as mid-arm circumference. You can do a calf circumference. So actually measuring, that's what we were doing back in the day. But as we have gotten more advanced, now we can objectively measure this with tools such as DEXA, which is known as body composition analysis. We also have in our clinic easy to use devices such as body plethysmography. And this gives us easily measurable tools such as body fat and muscle mass. That's what we can do in our clinic very easily. Secondly, besides muscle mass, you also need to look at muscle strength. So what is the function of this muscle? So even by definitions of sarcopenia, which simply put is a loss of muscle, that will happen whether you're a male or female as you age. So aging, as you asked me, is naturally the number one reason to lose muscle. And that's a natural process. Should we interfere with it? And the answer is yes. You need to strengthen your muscle just because if you don't have muscle, it is maybe one of the strongest marker for high risk of dying or mortality. Number two, as you pointed out, in elderly people, when they don't have muscle, they fall. They cannot have their balance, their muscles, their joints become weak, their joints are not able to maintain position. When they fall, they could get a fracture, they can get head injuries, contusions, hemorrhage. And yes, this becomes the number one reason for mortality or an increased chance of dying. And really being alive or dead is a very hard end point. You know whether you're alive or dead. And if you could simply prevent all of this by maintaining muscle, by preserving muscle. So you very nicely put, you said muscle preservation. So we are not even talking about building muscle, but jitna diya hai, at least whatever muscle we are born with, whatever muscle we have as we age, can we make that same muscle stronger? And the answer is yes. So by doing several kinds of, I'm sure you're going to ask me those questions, so we'll talk about it. What are the strategies? But yes, muscle preservation is key. Muscle strength is a great marker. And how we do it in our clinic is we have, of course, looking at body plethysmography, and we do certain other measures such as grip strength, sometimes a 6-minute walk test, as well as sometimes including a sit to stand test. Depends on what the underlying comorbidity of the patient is. So I hope that sort of answers, a little long answer, I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, you have answered almost half of my question.
Sorry, but
That's
as
okay,
I said,
totally
yes,
all right
yes.
then, yeah. So having said that, we'll move to the next session. Actually, when we talk about muscle preservation, muscle loss is also being a grave concern, because we have so many anti-obesity drugs coming into the market, which is actually the star player in these days. And the problem with these weight loss drugs are, even though in theory they say there is muscle preservation, there is no muscle loss at all. But in practice, what we see along with fat, are the muscles getting lost? Are these actually safe to use in our patients? Or is it a serious concern of, or if it's of insignificant, then yes. What are your views on the anti-obesity drugs, including the GLP-1 RS? And we can categorize SGLT2 as a, like, maybe in the similar category too.
Sure.
So what's
So-
your view?
So yes, the headlines was, so many of famous people are taking these anti-obesity medications and losing weight. And then of course, there's always going to be a second headline which talks about medications causing muscle loss. So is all the weight loss beneficial to us? So, whenever we are monitoring our patients that we put on anti-obesity medications, may it be something as simple as orlistat or something as complicated as GLP-1 receptor agonist, it behooves us to make sure we know that we are doing fat loss. Now, in our practice, in a 3-month period or a 6-month period, in the total weight loss journey of the patient, if the muscle loss is more than 10%, and this I'm talking about on body plethysmography because that's what we have in our clinic, then that is alarming. Some of the studies have of course shown there's a concern for sarcopenia, but other studies have also shown that you can mitigate or reduce this risk of muscle loss by making sure you have a very strong nutritional program in place for the patients. At the same time, you also want to make sure that most of your patients know how to include strength training. And if they cannot do strength training, then at least they must do resistance training with simpler things such as resistance bands or going to a physiotherapist. And a combined program of lifestyle along with the anti-obesity medications will certainly help to prevent the sarcopenia. But yes, it is certainly a concern, and that makes clinicians need to be aware when they use these molecules, how should you go about monitoring your patients? I think that's what is key. Yes.
Understood, ma'am. Well put, ma'am. Now that leads to me to the next question, which is the supplements. I'm not talking about I'm not downgrading the gyms. They give the whey proteins and all, but what we give our patients as diabetic specific nutrition, the DSN category. So will it be beneficial for our patients along with resistance training to give such protein supplement? Because again, our Indian diet is usually protein deficient, unlike the Westerners. We have an infamous slide which is going on in all the conferences where a Westerner is put and an Indian man is put, the middle-aged man, both have the same BMI, that is the BMI conundrum, and they have the fat percentage entirely different. The muscle mass of the Westerner is entirely high when compared to an Indian. So that brings us again to the thin fat Indian label. Having said that, how often do you prescribe these diabetes specific nutrition? Will it be beneficial in muscle development, muscle preservation, or is it actually required in our patients?
So I think that was a very long question. So I'm going to break it down into 2 parts at least. So number 1 is, what is this thin fat Indian phenotype? So just to explain to our audience what your doctor was talking about is that Indians, in spite of having a lower BMI, meaning that our BMI is not very high, less than 23, less than 25, which is not considered obese. When we start looking at what makes up this body weight, is it body fat or muscle? And again, using tools such as DEXA or body plethysmography, what we find is that at lower BMI, we have higher body fat percentages. So we have adiposopathy. Along with this high fat, we also have noticed we have a lower skeletal muscle or lean muscle mass index. And this is what is known as the thin fat Indian type, that we are thinner by BMI, but we have a lot of fat cells. Now, What you also asked me in the second part is that should we prescribe if we find this kind of a phenotype in our diabetic patients, in our older patients, or any patient? Do I like to use protein supplements? So what we do is certainly we work with diet programs first, and we try to bring them from, if they are just taking 0 0.5 grams per kilograms, we work up to 0.8 grams per kilograms. Depending on the underlying disease, for example, diabetes, kidney disease, patient preferences. If somebody is a gym goer trying to work on muscle gain, or an athlete, we may even go up to 1.5 grams per kilograms. At that time, sometimes it becomes important to use protein supplements. So we have various levels of supplements, right from using simple branch chain amino acids, which are usually high in leucine and isoleucine. And leucine is considered right now king for muscle building. We may also use a complex supplement known as either a whey protein, which are more dairy-based proteins, and then they can be divided into plant-based proteins. Now, plant-based proteins is more for people who are lactose intolerant or don't like dairy or are vegan, for example. So we have several protein supplements available to us. Now, also based on the underlying kidney or diabetes, as you mentioned, there are diabetic supplement powders. So very often I will use these supplements to make sure the patient can meet their protein requirements. We also train our patients to understand if they cannot meet their needs with dietary requirements, how can they do this on with the nutritional supplements. So I think there is room for everything. There is room to play with dietary supplements. There's room to understand diet, but it is a journey. In our journey, the patients work with the dietitians to understand what I call macronutrients. So you have to understand where your carbohydrates, fat and protein come from. So I think that's sort of the journey we need to give our patients. It's education, 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 and that is key.
Well said, ma'am. Now, I think this was supposed to be my introductory question, again, I'll come back to that question last but not the least. Muscle is considered as a vital organ or an endocrine organ these days, because other than mobility and motility, muscle has several other role to play, even in glucose metabolism also. Even the ominocytic muscle is there actually, have a great place. But how do you see, as an endocrinologist, is muscle actually can be called as an endocrine organ, or is it just any other vital organ per se, other than having the function of mobility or motility? What is your take on this, ma'am?
So I think this is like a dream for an endocrinologist, that now we are going to call, first we call the fat cell as an endocrine organ, now we are going to call the muscle as an endocrine organ. So I think I'm living in this dream world, but I probably need to go back to medical school to relearn everything. So as you rightfully put, the muscle is where once you eat food, for the audience, you're going to get blood sugar in your bloodstream. Now where is that cleared? That stimulates insulin and many other hormones, which then in turn translocates the glucose 4 transporters, the GLUT4 receptors as we call them, and that shifts the glucose into the cell. Several pathways start, several cascades of metabolism, several hormones. Now that is one part of the endocrine system, I would say. The second part, I think a lot of you would have heard that if you exercise, you can reduce the risk of cancer. A lot of you have heard if you exercise, it can directly reduce the risk of dementia and neurotrophic diseases. How is this happening is what we need to ask ourselves. How is contracting a muscle doing something to the brain? That has to be something which is an endocrine organ, something that is secreted from the muscle that now gets reversely into your bloodstream and affects your brain function. And these are things known as BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is getting stimulated by exercise. Now, secondly, we also know of several myokines that are released from the muscle that are going to reduce inflammatory pathways such as interleukin 6, also affecting interleukin 8, that reduce the risk of cancer-forming cells, that improve your heart function, that improve the metabolism and mitochondrial density in various parts of the body. So I think the muscle is not just an endocrine, but also a paracrine organ, because it also affects many things around it. And we still have several pathways to be explored, and the future will be exciting and interesting. Yes.
Thank you for answering that, ma'am. One last question from my side. Actually, an interesting question. Being a quite athletic person yourself, I saw you running 6 kilometers today, even in a day of your conference. So that's actually kind of like for youngsters like me, you're actually showing the world that exercise is that important. But having said that, we know we have been talking about aerobics exercises and strength training, which is resistance training. Flexibility is entirely a different topic. So, what is the ratio? Not exactly the ratio. What is your like advice to the patients? How many time, or in a day, how many minutes should be kept for an aerobic exercise and a resistance training? Whether they can do only resistance training at home because that's actually convenient for them in a quite busy life.
So I think that's again a tough question and has to be individualized based on the patient's age, time, what are they doing. So number one, we first need to understand what is aerobic activity. So when we start talking about aerobic and anaerobic, it means aerobic is when you stay in heart rate zones where you're not using glucose as energy, but you're using fat as a principle of energy. For example, let me give the example of running, because I'm a runner. We train our patients to run in aerobic zone. So aerobic is not only you see these girls dancing to some music, doing some certain movements. It's actually based on the underlying heart rate. So the heart rate that keeps you in aerobic zone is 180 minus age. Whereas maximal heart rate zones are 220 minus age, which we use for treadmill testing and VO2 max testing. So what we have done in our clinic is we have developed protocols for any activity you do. If you stay in aerobic zone, which is again, just as a reminder, 180 minus age, you will keep using fat as a source of energy. Once you use fat as a source of energy, what you're going to do is you will increase capillary density, you'll improve mitochondrial density, and you will activate from white muscle tissue to red muscle tissue. Red muscle tissue is something which is built for endurance athletes. Now, if I'm trying to train someone who's a sprinter, he needs to know how to develop his white muscle tissue, which uses his glucose as a source of energy. So that's when we start training them also to work on the anaerobic or sprints, HIIT, high intensity interval training. So that's your cardio, that's one part of the training. Now, as you said, one cannot be complete without the other. Whenever a runner comes into our practice, we don't ask them to run first. We actually ask them to start doing strength training first. Because when you're running, when you're doing any cardio activity, it is your entire body weight that is pounding on, whether you're playing football, hockey, cricket, you have to be able to take that weight. So we will start with lighter weights, maybe resistance bands, something very simple, and then move on to heavier weights. And you can use two varieties. So there are power-based strength training movements and there are hypertrophy-based strength training movements. So you have to understand this and do this with a trainer. Now, secondly, also, we have older patients who come to us, and for them, we have developed simpler things such as resistance training with bands, balance activities, flexibility. To me, cardio and flexibility will always be more superior to doing anything else. Because if you're flexible, if you don't have issues with your joints, that is a marker of longevity and healthy longevity. So I know it's a very complex answer, but I think to give it a simple takeaway, people need to understand something very simple known as the rate of perceived exertion. So like for example, when we are running, if you can have a good conversation, talk or sing a song, you're probably in aerobic zone. If you are running and you are panting, you can't even pronounce your name, your heart rate is too high, you are anaerobic. Slow down, it's okay to walk till you can run. So little steps go a long way, but you just need to start somewhere. So let's say we all need to start. We are here to guide you. There are several great protocols out there. I would suggest doing it with a trainer under supervision always, so that we can be successful in our protocols.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a really wonderful and knowledgeable session. With her busy schedule, she has given us time for this. I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart. And ma'am, is there any take-home personal message for the audience from you, ma'am?
So yes, I think I'm very happy to be here. I think D-Genuine, I wish you all the success, and it's a great idea to go and do this. So simply put, if you can do three things, I will say 3S approach. Start moving, make it sustainable, meaning keep on doing it every day. Strength training is key. And last but not the least, pay attention to your protein intake, your muscular intake. So safe, sustainable and a scientific approach will go a long way. That's what I would suggest to our audience.
Ma'am, as this is a D-Genuine podcast, can you please leave your message to the young diabetologists across the country who's listening to this podcast? Any message from your side?
Absolutely. I think to the genuine youngsters out there, I look upon you as the future generation. You are my army. You are our army. In India, as we have already shown you, there's more than 135 million people living with obesity. You can be certain they all have sarcopenia. More than 40% of the youth will be affected by obesity. What you need to be doing is you need to start with the young children and adolescents. Let's get into every village, every school. Let's get into the minds of every young child and get into them the importance of lifestyle, nutrition and exercise. When we all went to medical school, unfortunately, we never got trained. We never got trained in school or medical school. Something that we do on a daily basis needs to be a part of the curriculum. I have great hope in all of you that if we can make a movement and get this incorporated at the grassroots level, what are the food groups we need to eat? What brings protein? What are the exercise strategies we can develop and easily do at every stage of life, from 10 to 15, 15 to 20, 20 to 25, in order to build muscle, which needs to be done when you're younger, and then to preserve muscle when you start getting just 25 plus. After the age of 25, we start losing muscle. So now is the time to act, and I look upon all of you youngsters to help us achieve this goal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you all for patient listening.